Yes, so Burgundy is more popular than it's ever been. Golden age of Burgundy, etc., etc. I moved fairly early on in my career to making Burgundy my major thing, and it was really hard work for the longest time. For about 20 years, it was a bit of a struggle to get people to buy Burgundy. They'd look at me with a sort of patronising smile and say, "My dear boy, first duty of a wine is to be red, and the second is to be Bordeaux."
Yeah.
And then people began to allow there might be some white Burgundy, and then the reds began to come back into fashion a little bit more. And we had maybe no more than 5 years when things were in equilibrium. I could find enough clients who really did want to buy Burgundy, but it hadn't totally taken off. And it begins around about 2005. Partly that's great vintage, but also the thing which has been a real change is the internet and the fact that everybody can see everything that's going on everywhere. And suddenly, it used to be the case that as a wine buyer, you'd have your one or two merchants. Occasionally, you'd look at a few other lists and make a speculative purchase. But basically, you bought from your wine merchant. You get his list, and you'd read it through, and you'd say, "Oh, I think I'll have some of that." And you'd write a letter and ask for it, and you'd get a letter back, and then you might get a delivery. But it was all done in those ways. And the merchants would send out lists once a year with maybe a few supplements from time to time. And it really was done on paper. And now with the internet, you can see, and then you can see if one person's price is that, you can look around and see if somebody else has got it at a better price. And you also start to get the wine price comparison websites. Now, in the case of Bordeaux, that stops you paying too much, because you can look around and say, "He's too expensive, I'll buy that." But in the case of Bordeaux, you've got many, many different people offering the same wine for sale. And if somebody wants to take a flyer and think that wine's worth more than that and puts it out at a high price, it's not going to work for them. In Burgundy, there might only be one or two examples of a given wine up for sale. And because it was becoming so popular everywhere, people would see a new price on one of these sites and think that was the new market price. And all the merchants would change their price upwards to join that, or at least the next time they had a case to sell. So it actually has become more of a spiral in prices in Burgundy.
So that the whole rarity of the great wines of the region has been a major source of inflation.
So you've got rarity, you've got transparency of pricing, and you've got the fact that everyone in the world, and there are now many more parts of the world interested in fine wine, has enjoyed Burgundy, because the reds at any rate have never been more consistent or finer than they have been in, well, that's started in 1985, but certainly in the last 25 years.
Well, that leads me to the final question I'd like to ask you with this little historical overview, which is, do we have the best of all Burgundy worlds we could have now, or are there areas in which we might revise and improve things in Burgundy? And I'm particularly thinking of, the fact that the appellation system came into being in the 1930s, which was a very different period, much less economic interest in the wines of Burgundy, very different weather patterns. Now we have a world which is clamouring for Burgundy. Now we have a much warmer world. So do the old classifications still make sense?
Can I ask you a question? Why do you think we have appellations? What was the reasoning? What was the demand that made
the major reason, as I understand it, was to prevent fraud originally.
Yes.
It was so that you could buy your bottle of Chambertin and have some trust that it actually came from that vineyard.
No, I agree with the first half of your statement, but not the second. It wasn't about the consumer. The whole idea of the consumer being important didn't exist then. It was to protect the producer entirely, so that
Is that true?
Absolutely. Oh. It was the people in Châteauneuf-du-Pape who were getting fed up with other people using their names so they could sell their wines. Yes, it's all about that. It's about protection
against
for the producer in the good
behaviour
areas.
on the part of
exactly
others.
So that's why that there weren't particularly any quality requirements in the Appellation Contrôlée laws. Instead, it was all about the guarantee of provenance, if you like.
Yes, but we live in the world we live in now, so we take provenance more or less for granted. We are interested in buying the best Burgundy we can possibly buy. What I'm asking is, does the present classification of vineyards in Burgundy, in this specific case, really prevent us from having all the Burgundy we could have? No,
I don't think so. I don't think it does prevent us.
Okay.
In any case, most people making their decisions, they're still led more by producer than they are by the appellation. Sure, there will be times when an appellation can be a little, but given that we are really predicated around two main grape varieties, then I don't think people are being held back. The only people who might think they're being held back is if they want to exceed the allowable yield for their Grand Cru, but no.
So you don't think there's a case for putting vineyards above the Grand Cru in Gevrey-Chambertin, for example, where the vineyards at the moment just stop and you have forest and that's that?
But some of that land is actually classified as being allowable for vineyards. The Bel Air, for example, if you look on a map.
That is already planted, but there must be...
There's lots more of Bel Air that isn't.
Ah, okay.
But it depends who owns the forest. And they are actually making little extra plantings in Estonel and Poissonneau.
Right. So
it can happen.
Some minor developments are underway.
Yes, and in other villages there's more. There's been a lot more in Volnay. There are other reasons not to do with appellation, which is preventing it. It's partly to do with who owns the land, and it's partly to do with the fear that if you change the lines of the forest, you change the habits of the hailstorms.
Oh, explain that briefly.
Well,
on the subject.
I found it difficult to understand,
right,
because you would have thought that if pushing back the forest by 100 metres meant that the hail now fell on Chambertin, then if the forest was 100 metres further down the slope before, then shouldn't the hail have fallen 100 metres further down the slope? And it doesn't work as simply as that. But it's more a question of getting corridors, and then when temperature changes, then that's when the hailstorm is likely to happen. So there is a view that that's why Volnay has had quite as many hailstorms in the years between 2000 and 2011. 14, I have to say. 2001, 2004, 2006, 2008, 2012, 13, 14. Lots of people got them in 12, 13, 14, but other villages weren't getting them in those other years. And certainly one theory, and I have no idea if it's right or not, is that it's because they started taking down the forest and putting vineyards further behind.
Oh, okay. That's very interesting. Yeah. I didn't know that. So, well, anyway, we can summarise by saying it's an immensely complex situation, and nothing seems likely to change dramatically in the immediate future.
Except that the INAO, the authorities in charge of Burgundy, or not just Burgundy, of all the appellations in France, suddenly came up with this bombshell that they wanted to stretch the Bourgogne appellation down into the Beaujolais, lots of communes there, and take it away from lots of existing communes.
Yes, this is a recent controversy. Well, since you've raised it, it's a great way to finish our little purview. So just run us through that, Jasper.
Okay, so French bureaucrats are taught sort of Cartesian logic, and the people in the Beaujolais have been pushing for this because they're not making a living out of selling their own wine. And it is true that when the authorities in the 1930s started to put Burgundy together, they didn't really work on the basic Bourgogne appellation beyond, outside the Côte d'Or and I think the Côte Chalonnaise, but they didn't do it for the Yonne and the Chablis area, and they didn't do it for the Beaujolais. So that's the argument that the Beaujolais people were coming up with, because they were hoping that they could sell their wine, start planting more Pinot, and certainly there's plenty of Chardonnay down there, getting it sold as Bourgogne. They would get a much better price than they can for what it is at the moment, and négociants in Beaune would be able to buy wine for their Bourgognes at a better price. So the authorities look at this and say, okay, right, well, if we're going to redraw the map, we'll do that, and we'll kick out areas which don't actually produce very much Bourgogne. So if you're in Chablis and you're just missing being Chablis or Petit Chablis, you're probably Bourgogne Blanc at the moment. If you happen to have some Pinot Noir vines in the Chablis area, and I know one person who's got some in the middle of his Chablis Premier Cru, that sells as Bourgogne Rouge. Not as Red Chablis, doesn't exist, so it sells as Bourgogne Rouge. So all those guys, overnight they lose it. There are people up in the hills by Dijon who have Bourgogne at the moment, they would lose that. There's a whole little sub-region called the Châtillonnais, which is largely down to sparkling wine, but not only, and they would lose all theirs. So the INAO just came up with, they're looking at statistics, they're looking at the history. It's all an entirely theoretical view that they're taking. So they come up with this view, and all hell breaks loose, and everybody gets in their buses and goes up. And
But the decision has been suspended, I believe, now?
It's been suspended, but they have said that they will not take the Bourgogne appellation away from anything that's currently got it. They haven't yet said whether they will add in these Beaujolais areas.
Okay.